Hey, what's going on guys, it's Jack. Back in to bring you the 8.0 Battle for Azeroth Disc Basic Guide. Everything you need to know about playing Disc Priest in a quick and easy to consume format. Starting it off, why play Discipline to begin with? Priest, of course, is the only healer spec with two different healer specializations, and Disc is quite a far cry from the usual blueprint that you'll see with Holy Priest of being the very standard, very MMO style fielding healer. This one's quite a bit different, offering the ability to do significant damage while also being able to use that damage to be healing other members of the raid. They bring significant external cooldowns in terms of damage reduction for the group, both with barrier and with pain suppression, offering very hefty damage reduction for those who are being affected by it. And in general, it is quite a lot of fun being able to use a lot of the new talents which we're going to be able to get into today. There is quite a bit of accessibility that has been added in order to get new players into the spec, but there also is quite a bit of depth which we'll go into. Now, going into the talents, important to note with the Battle for Azeroth pre-patch, there's going to be some talents that will be more viable, more interesting at the start, and then going into Old Year, going into the Battle for Azeroth expansion, when we lose some different tier set bonuses, for example, the talents will switch around. So in the 15 tier, Castigation is a very competitive pick with Schism, as we're seeing in the pre-patch. But once Battle for Azeroth comes out, Twist of Fate will be your primary talent for progression raid healing. These talents all have some pretty nice balances to them, pretty nice side effects that they'll be able to have going into it here. So Castigation has that Antaurus tier set bonuses, which are very powerful, so it can be a strong option alongside Schism. On the 30 tier, mobility and some damage reduction, Angelic Feather does take the cake because, as we've seen with Powered Shield cooldown being removed, Body and Soul now has an internal cooldown of 6 seconds, which means it's very difficult to actually control who gets that movement ability if you're casting Powered Shields frequently enough to be able to keep that internal cooldown, that ICD, consistently rolling. So you may not even get any benefit for yourself if you're taking Body and Soul. On the 45, these are the mana-oriented talents. Shield Discipline is going to be the highest mana that you're going to be going after here. Mindbender can be a nice in-between if you need to be able to get some damage, but you're not really too focused about the healing component. And Solace offers some good synergy between Schism in conjunction to Solace. Being able to actually pair up that big damage into a tight window of time can be very important. But also can be a lot heavier on maintenance. On the 60 tier, these are primarily PvP focused or crowd control oriented. The lower cooldown on a Psychic Screen can be quite nice in 5-man environments, but we'll talk about that in a little bit, as can be some of the other options, so depending on what you need there. 75 tier, this is a lot more focused on 5-mans, but what you will be usually going for in raids is either going to be Sins of the Many or Contrition. With Discipline in Battle for Azeroth, you'll be having a fairly low amount of atonements up at a consistent basis, so you will be able to have some decent Sins of the Many utilization, because Sins of the Many lowers your damage by 1%, is a 12% damage increase, and that bonus gets reduced by 1% per atonement out, right? So you will still have some damage increase benefits there, and Contrition, with how much you will be using Defensive Penance in raids, can get some decent healing out as well. On the 90 tier, Halo looking to be incredibly strong going into BfA and outpacing Purge the Wicked. And this is primarily due to the Shadow or Pain buff that has been received, and making it so that they're doing about the same damage as Purge the Wicked. If that changes, if they do actually end up buffing Purge over the damage of Shadow or Pain, then you might be seeing it compete with Halo. But for now, Halo's the way to go. On the 100 tier, Evangelism is quite a powerful talent, just like in Legion. Being able to extend the duration of your atonements makes it so that you really, even when you're missing some of your artifact or other abilities taken out in going from Legion to BfA, you will still have these burst window potential that can open up for you, because you're allowed to get out a very large amount of atonements, extend the duration of them, and have them ready for the big damage to go out. Lenience very rarely would probably ever be used in raids, and Luminous Barrier is extremely situational. While it turns your damage reduction cooldown into more of a throughput-based cooldown, or one that you'll be able to more easily see on the meters, it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the best option for you. This would primarily be more a niche pick on certain raid encounters. Now for the 5-mans, now we've kind of gone over these, you have two kind of builds that you would like to go for. A very safe build, a very secure build, will be something like Twist of Fate with Feather, maybe Mindbender or Solace, paired up with Contrition or Shadow Covenant with Purge the Wicked and Lenience. This build is built and focused more on safety and security of your tank rather than pumping out a lot of damage in the instance itself. When you're anticipating, for example, your tank dropping low more quickly, that puts a lot of pressure on you to make sure you're using frequent defensive penance and Shadow Mends to keep them alive. And the second build that you can go for is a lot more aggressive. This is a Schism with Solace and Sins of the Many, keeping, of course, Feather, Purge the Wicked, and Lenience from before. And this basically just makes it so that you are gearing yourself towards more atonement-based healing and playing as aggressively as possible to be able to dish out as much damage to kill the enemies quickly so that they're not going to be destroying your tanks or anything. There are some risks and benefits to these. I think the second one that we just listed right here is going to be the most competitive. So if you're already well geared, you already have a good understanding of what's going on, and you're running with experienced friends, this is going to be the talent section for you. But I think if you're just starting off and you will be using frequent Shadow Mends and defensive penances for new content, especially early in dungeons once you actually hit level 120, then you may want to go for the safer tier there. Healing in Battle for Azeroth is going to be quite a bit more expanded, and in many cases offer quite a bit more choices than we actually did end up seeing in Legion, where Legion was very focused on those singular burst windows to be able to dominate, and then you're doing very little healing in between those. The Discipline is actually going to be having quite a bit more healing for those steady damage periods. They will be able to put out a couple of atonements here and there to be able to actually do quite a bit of spot healing on the side. And a lot of this from a priority standpoint starts with Penance. While the priority system for Discipline can be quite rough, generally it's going to start with using Penance either offensively or defensively on cooldown. So the big choice here, the big decision you have to make for this is whether or not, depending on how many atonements you have out, right? Usually it's about half the raid is about the break point, around 10 people or 11 people or so is going to be around the break point for when you want to switch from using defensive penance onto offensive. But generally what it will look like is, having 4 to 5 atonements out, depending on the damage going out. It could be as low as just 1 or 2 on the tanks. It could be as much as 7 or 8 if there's going to be quite a bit of damage happening, but you're not going to be using all your Powered Radiance charges for it. So keep in mind the damage patterns going out to that. But in terms of low damage, you will have a low amount of atonements. When you're predicting high damage, that is when you want to be ramping up to a larger amount of atonements. You only want to be ramping up, building atonements using your Powered Radiance charges, for example, when there's going to be anticipated big damage. Discipline is going to be a lot more proactive, so you need to make sure that those atonements are applied before the damage is going out. That way you'll be able to respond more rapidly. If the hits have already gone out, that's when you'll be putting out maybe a couple here and there on the most affected targets, the most low health targets, through just Powered Shield or maybe a quick Powered Radiance, and then you will either be using defensive penance followed up by smites onto the boss to be able to quickly top them back off and provide some extra healing in that. Gameplay wise for Disc, when you're in the raid encounters, big things you have to be watching out for is how many atonements that you're going to be applying and when are you applying them. A large focus, for example, for Discipline is proactive healing, making sure that you have atonements placed onto targets via Powered Shield, which now replaces Plea, or Powered Radiance, or even Shadow Mend, to be able to apply those atonements onto targets before the damage actually ends up going out. So in terms of which you want to be using first, or when do you want to be using those abilities, Powered Shield usually is going to be your bread and butter. It will be a nice, cheap, and efficient way of applying atonements on targets. Powered Radiance does have a hefty cost and cooldown, but it is a very easy way to be able to apply a lot of atonements at once. And if you're caught off guard by a hit, having Powered Radiance available can go a very long way. But ideally, you want to be using these before damage goes out, so that you can preempt it and quickly respond to that damage and keep everybody topped off here. So in terms of atonement applicators, Powered Shield is going to be your bread and butter. Purge the Wicked will be in preparation for big hits, or maybe to catch you back up from one. And Shadow Mend will be used if targets are very low HP. And if you, in many cases, if you have excess mana, if you are doing a great job conserving your mana, or maybe you don't need to actually take, for example, more mana-based talent, then you can use Shadow Mend, for example, to pump out more healing while still applying atonements before damage goes out. In terms of the damage that you're going to be dealing to the bosses, Always very important to maintain Shatter or Pain or Purge the Wicked if you're talented into it on the boss, and as many targets as will be reasonable. If you're able to get full duration of your dot, that is a very good value that you'll be getting out, but keep in mind you can't be dotting up all 20-something adds if something spawns, even if they're going to be reaching full duration, because you still need to be able to apply some atonements. So if it will be a handful that you'll be able to apply onto enemies here and there, and then you need to ramp up to be able to respond to any damage that they'll be dealing to the group, that's what you want to be looking for. That's the ideal scenario, is applying as many as you can, as reasonable, and then moving on to be able to make sure people are staying topped off here. Penance will be, of course, used on cooldown, and it will be your bread and butter ability throughout the Battle for Azeroth. Whether you're going to be using it defensively to heal an ally or offensively to damage an enemy to proc atonement healing is going to depend primarily on how many atonements you have out in general. The usual breakpoint that people are looking at is around 10 or 11 atonements out onto the group as to when you want to switch from defensive with contrition over to offensive. The big thing that you want to look at here is, once you are responding to damage or once you're, healing different encounters, you'll find that usually you have about 4 or 5 atonements out on average, and that, again, that's not a requirement, but about on average to be able to heal the tanks and then 1 or 2 other people taking some damage. But then when you see and anticipate a big raid hit coming out, that's when you'll ramp up to, say, 15 or 16 atonements, by using powered shields into 2 powered radiance charges, into ideally a Mindbender, Evangelism, and then penancing offensively with Smite to follow through. That is an ideal big ramp up that you'll be focusing on. But in between those areas, that's where you'll be focusing on just having a couple out here and there and spot healing with defensive penance, right? So keep in mind that sort of overturn of most of the group getting covered in atonements, offensive, handful of people here and there, you'll be using it defensively. Some important things to note is if you're going to be taking a talent, for example, like Schism, which has a limited burst window of extra damage that the priest will be able to dish out, pets like Shadow Fiend or Mindbender are not affected by that damage buff, but you are able to increase the damage, for example, of your Solace, of your Penance, your Shadow or Pain. Any damage that you as the priest are dealing will make it quite a bit easier to put out a little bit more burst healing out of the group. So keeping in mind those burst windows, but also transitioning us into the stat priority, what you want to be going for with those to better maximize your effectiveness with the playstyle we just discussed. Now that takes us into stat priority for discipline. Going into 8.0, the first raid will be Oldir, and when all of the gears more or less reset, the power level of healers drops down. There's a huge emphasis for Disc Priests to go for haste as much as they possibly can early on. And Battle for Azeroth is no different. When you're first gearing up and first hitting 120, you will be finding tons of eye level upgrades along the way, which will greatly increase your intellect levels and just general stats, which would be great to go for. Once you're able to start optimizing your gear further, you definitely want to be prioritizing haste and as many pieces as possible to have it. Many people are finding that even with the haste levels around 27-28%, on live right now, it still feels a little bit different. From my testing in beta, I've gotten to around 20% and start feeling a little bit better, but still would probably continue to prioritize it until it maybe feels a little bit too much. Your mastery is now the grace effect, keeping in mind that any targets that have atonement on them receive increased healing and absorption effects. So mastery is an incredibly powerful stat that you will also be able to stack. But again, your priority will be on haste first. So ideally haste, then mastery, and crit and verse will be kind of following along as well. Neither are poor stats, but they're definitely not going to be as high on the priority list going into your gear sets here. So ideally prioritizing haste very early on. If you'd like to see a more in-depth breakdown and longer discussion of Disc Priest, be sure to check out my Wowhead guides linked in the description below. There you can find also more information as we're going into the expansion about the Azerite traits you want to be going after and specific trinkets and other gear sets you're going to be targeting as the expansion rolls out. Keep an eye on those. For now, I hope you guys found this helpful for a starter beginner disc guide. If you have any other kind of questions, be sure to leave them down in the comments below. Be sure to check out my live stream, also linked in the description below. We're probably streaming tons of Mythic Plus on my Disc Priest, and of course we will be leveling going into Battle for Azeroth at this one's spec. Thank you for watching, guys. Hope you all found it useful, and I'll catch you all next time.